Hello and welcome to In the Comics, a series where I take movies and TV show episodes that are either based on a specific comic or take elements from one or several comics to make an adaptation worth talking about. This is Batman The Long Halloween Part 2, and I'm sorry, I know a couple of people have been asking for this one, but it got delayed because of that. But that's the last word I'm going to be saying on them. So suffice to say, it was nice to get back to a property that fully and wholly understands the world and characters it's adapting. For those of you who are just joining us, I don't know why you would be starting with part 2. Part 1's there if you need it. Otherwise, this is how we do things here. First, I summarise the basic plot they both go by, I talk about what the movie did better, I talk about what the comic did better, and I talk about what they did differently that just serviced their respective stories. So let's dive in with the plot. Poison Ivy is hired by Carmine Falcone to enthrall Bruce, and she coerces him into signing away his stake in Wayne Enterprises. There are 3 more murders, one on Valentine's Day, one on St. Patrick's Day, and one on April Fool's Day. Selina realises what's going on and rescues Bruce by slashing the vines containing him. Sophia Falcone, Carmine's daughter, breaks Jonathan Crane out of Arkham. Bruce tries to stop him but gets injected with fear toxin, causing him to see his mother. We get a flashback to Dr. Thomas Wayne saving Carmine's life. Maroni, the other prominent mob boss in Gotham, goes to visit his father for advice on the gang war, and we find out that him and Sophia are dating. Maroni's father is then shot, and that leads Maroni to agreeing to testify for Harvey Dent against Falcone because he seemingly blames the man for his father's murder. Scarecrow and the Mad Hatter rob a bank together and Batman catches them. Harvey goes to court with Maroni as a witness, who then throws acid on him as he believes that he is in fact the Holiday Killer who murdered his father. Harvey escapes hospital and goes to find Solomon Grundy. Meanwhile, Carmine is having a birthday party, which is interrupted by his sister's death, though interestingly the killer does not leave a souvenir on this occasion, probably because it's August. All the evidence at this point seems to be pointing towards Harvey being the killer. Batman visits Carmine and they talk about the deaths before they are interrupted by Catwoman, and we find out that she's been stalking Carmine because she believes he may be her father. Batman talks to Gilda, trying to find Harvey, and seems to be convinced of the man's guilt. He goes back to Calendar Man, who is very little help. Maroni is in the middle of a prison transfer which is interrupted by a Holiday suspect, and Batman, dressed up as a guard, tries to rescue him as it was a trap for Holiday, but Maroni is killed anyway. Harvey lets out several Arkham inmates on the toss of a coin, Lady Luck not being on Calendar Man's side. And I would like to make a quick retraction because in part 1 I said that it was a mistake to show all the villains in Arkham because it gave the impression that they'd already been around for a while because they've been caught for high profile crimes and tried for them. But that was kind of a mistake in the sense that the comic clearly does this as well. It just doesn't put it at the forefront, so I never really noticed it. But they are still all in Arkham, so clearly they've been around for a decent amount of time, so back to the Joker's assertion that
there's only room for one homicidal maniac in this town
doesn't really make sense. I mean, seriously, does that entire cell block not count? Why is Joker so focused on the blandest serial killer that ever existed? So yeah, I still maintain that that's a problem, but I would like to retract the fact that the comic did it better because the comic did the exact same thing. Anyway, back to the plot. The Rogues go to pay the Falcones a visit, and Harvey says that Carmine has made Gotham a rigged game and he's going to give him fair odds. Batman and Catwoman break in and a fight breaks out, and Catwoman and Sophia fall out of the window. Catwoman tries to save Sophia, but she dies. Harvey manages to kill Falcone and then goes up to the roof to wait for Gordon and Batman, where he confesses and allows himself to be arrested. And the mystery is solved, at least for the audience, as we see Gilda burning Holiday Killer evidence, revealing that she was Holiday. So in part 1 I first explored what the comic did better, so to mix things up a little bit, let's start with the movie. We actually get a pretty good look at how Ivy's powers work and what's happening inside Bruce's head as he's enthralled. Normally with Ivy's powers it's just, I'm in a haze and now I'm out of the haze. But we see that her powers increase people's susceptibility and there is much more manipulation involved, which makes it genuinely more disturbing. Catwoman and Ivy also have a much better fight, as in the comics Selina just slashes the vines and Ivy runs away. This woman has the power over all plant life and she just skedaddles because her hold over Bruce is broken. One thing I will be talking about more in the neutral section is the cuts the movie made, but as that goes to the heart of what each version is trying to do, it's not something I can genuinely say the movie did better. However, I do think it's something the movie should be praised for, as it knew exactly where to cut without really losing that much. A big example of this is the April Fool's issue that didn't amount to much more than being a recap with the Riddler going through the Holiday murders at the behest of Carmine and trying to solve the mystery. He doesn't, so what was the point? Again, I'll be talking about the cuts more as a neutral change, but I can say that the movie genuinely did know where to cut. Since this version is more character-focused, I do think Harvey's descent into madness was played out much better here. We see a gradual deterioration from mood swings to hearing voices. You see piece by piece this guy's mind breaking, whereas this was mostly a visual thing in the comics. A good one, but it feels more like foreshadowing than character development. The way I would illustrate the two differences is comic Harvey is a bomb that you know is going to go off, but you don't quite know when. Movie Harvey is a bomb that not only has a timer you can see ticking down, but someone cutting wire after wire and you don't know which one of those wires is going to set it off. And I think in a way that really added to the tragic element of this character, because it at least gave me the feeling that Harvey could have been saved. Like, if someone had just known what was happening. He did get support from Jim. Jim did look out for him. He tried to offer him advice. He comforted him. But he didn't really see what was going on psychologically in this man's head. No one did. No one other than Gilda. And oh boy, are we going to be getting to her. So yeah, again, it felt like his wires were being cut. And if someone had just noticed that this was happening, I do get the feeling that this needn't have happened. Whereas in the comic, it kind of felt more like an inevitable decline. Please do tell me if you disagree with me on this point, because I am genuinely curious if this was just me. So another small thing I appreciated that the movie did was, for Batman's fear-induced hallucinations, it used a different animation style. But now on to the main thing the movie did better, which is the mystery storytelling. The pieces are put into place much better, and even if you do suss out what's going on, you still feel rewarded by the revelation. Funnily enough though, they don't stray from the comic as much as you'd think they would. The big difference is Alberto surviving and taking credit for the Holiday murders as basically a giant fuck you to his father, who is significantly more loving towards him in the comic book version, but we'll be getting to Carmine. The only real significant change here is the motivation, which thankfully wipes out all the confusion over which Holiday killer was which the comic really doesn't explain very well. I'm sure there will be some people out there who have dived even further into this comic than I have, but yeah, I've read it several times and I still don't know which Holiday killer killed which victim. I don't know how Alberto survived. I don't know, was he really shot by Holiday or did he fake his death? And if he did fake his death, then who was the actual New Year's victim? I don't know. Anybody knows, tell me, because I am still confused. But thankfully the movie wipes out all that and gives us a very intriguing, logical, and emotionally resonant reason for all of this to have gone down. And it also pays off Batman's evolution as a detective, as it was all Gilda. And Harvey only realises this when Gordon says they found Holiday's guns in his basement, and his subsequent protection of Holiday coupled with the Oxford flags Batman finds in his basement, Oxford being the university Alberto went to, is what allows Batman to solve the case. In the comic, Gilda being quite unhinged is just talking to Harvey, whereas she is actually confessing to Batman in the movie. Now, on to the motivation, and this totally changes Gilda's character. Apparently I was not embarrassingly wrong in my prediction in part 1, and Gilda was Alberto's girlfriend, the one he confessed to Selina about. He got her pregnant, he married her, he brought her home to Carmine, but apparently that man would not accept a child conceived out of wedlock, and he annulled their marriage and forcibly aborted the child. And Alberto just let him. And the thing is, not only does this give her more sympathetic motivation, but at the same time it affects her and makes her more callous. And as a result gives us, or me anyway, infinite more sympathy for Harvey. In the comic, Gilda was just a scared woman whose husband's dangerous career was destroying her life and marriage. And her taking out these criminals was just an unhinged, desperate attempt to get her husband back. And as I've said before, this doesn't make logical sense, but it makes emotional sense and ties more into what the comic is trying to do, but please see my review of Long Halloween for more on that. So, in the movie, when Gilda is giving Harvey the cold shoulder and really not treating him very well, you think initially that it's because of his job, that it's causing tension in their marriage, and just it's understandable, like couples have tension. But she says that she married Harvey because she thought he could get her justice. So he's out there prosecuting these mobsters, trying to get enough evidence to get them in jail and off the streets for her. And she's still treating him like he's a bad husband. And there's of course this bit where a news anchor hypothesizes that Harvey may be the killer, and she asks him, is it true? Which she knows it's not. So why would she put him in the position of having him think his wife believes he could possibly be a murderer when she knows he isn't? She did this to her husband, someone who loved her. She says she loved him too, but I honestly don't think she has the capacity within her to love anyone anymore. And that is brilliantly chilling. Okay, now on to what the comic did better. And just carrying on from where we left off, Batman just leaving Gilda and not arresting her after she confessed to all this? No. Batman would have taken her in there and then. I really do not get this creative choice. I honestly don't. I mean, maybe he had sympathy for her. I get it. But do we honestly believe that Batman would let Harvey or anyone take the fall for crimes they didn't commit, let alone let a serial killer go free? Really just fell right off the edge of the cliff there, Long Halloween. I don't know why they did that. Anyway, mostly what the comic did better was in its individual elements, whereas the movie's strength was in its more cohesive whole. However, there was a point besides the ending when the movie was much less coherent. And that's right at the beginning. We ended part 1 with Bruce being enthralled by Ivy. This happened at Alberto's funeral, which was shortly after New Year. So Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, and April Fool's Day passes, and nobody notices Day of the Triffids happening at Wayne Manor? So yeah, it took Selina a hell of a long time to notice that anything was up. In the comic, Bruce is on a Valentine's Day date with Selina, and that's where Ivy offers him a rose and ensnares him there. And Selina notices something is up almost immediately and takes action again immediately. And I know the movie did this so that they could convey the passage of time happening, but it doesn't put a lot of the characters in a very good light. Let alone make sense that one of the most famous men in Gotham could disappear into his shockingly overgrown home for 3 months. Another thing the comic did better was their treatment of Bruce's secret identity. It wasn't much of an issue in the comic, but the movie plays really fast and loose with it. Bruce is constantly taking off his mask, Selina knows who he is, and I'm surprised that Harvey and Gordon don't know too. I know, especially in this day and age with mobile phone technology and the internet and everything, it would be pretty much impossible for a superhero to maintain a secret identity, but even so, this is really taking the piss. Again, I know Bruce is new at this, but if this is how he treats his secret identity, he's gonna be found out in nothing flat. Carla Viti finally gets some lines, but they don't amount to much more than,
"Don't you talk about my family! Don't you talk about my family!
So on the whole, her character was handled a lot better in the comic. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that she was the most important character. Like I said, there is a case for cutting her if time and budget was a consideration, but she does play a significant part in fleshing out this Falcone family dynamic. So if you're going to cut her, cut her. If you're going to have her, but don't just leave her puttering about in the background and then give her 2 lines in an attempt to make her death mean something, which it ultimately doesn't. The art and general designs of the characters are leagues superior in the comics, but I already went into depth with that topic in part 1. So I won't repeat myself here, but I do want to point out Sophia Falcone, because again, the movie is much more character focused, so they gave her a little bit more vulnerability, just fleshed her out into more of a character. But in the comic, we got to see her being an enforcer for the Falcone family, and just her entire presence, her design, she didn't actually do much except the enforcer stuff, but she just left such an impression on me, just that silent presence. We saw a little bit of vulnerability when she tried to give her father a tie for Father's Day, and he kind of just brushed her off, but Sophia Falcone was one of those characters that just didn't really make an impression when you tried to flesh her out a little bit more. Also, her death is not as good. She just trips over Ivy's vines, whereas in the comic, her and Catwoman are engaged in battle and they go tumbling out the window as a result. But that's kind of a small thing. The final thing I think the comic did better was Carmine. Not his whole characterization, but him as an emotional human being. I would have put this as a neutral change because his character change is highly connected to Gilda's motivation. He forcibly aborted his own grandchild, so yeah, he is going to have to be significantly colder and just significantly more, for lack of a better term, villainous than he was in the comic. But it goes in what the comic did better rather than the neutral section, because for some reason they tried to add this.
I wish I had the chance to be a better father to my boy. For that, I am so sorry.
Yeah. A man who forcibly aborts his own grandchild, treats both of his kids like shit, and doesn't shed a tear at his son's funeral, suddenly feels bad. I'm not saying that he couldn't regret his actions, but the movie just really did not earn his regret. Okay, finally we get to the neutral changes, and for this adaptation, they are kind of the meat of the issue. But before we dive into that, I'm just going to list a few small changes that I saw that I thought were interesting. Due to the different motivation, the relationship between Harvey and Carmine is more personal, which leads to a scene between Harvey escaping from hospital and finding Solomon Grundy, where Carmine tries to have him assassinated. It's a pretty good scene and increases the idea that everyone thinks Harvey is guilty and he is entirely on his own. Another thing is we get more verbal indications of how this is affecting people's relationships, things that were mostly displayed visually in the comics. And lastly, Bruce's parents' death as an emotional driving force is much more prevalent in the movie and makes sense, as Long Halloween readers will already be familiar with the Wayne's deaths. And since no emphasis is put on Bruce being in his early years as Batman, it would have come across as a tired old plot point. However, the movie decides to focus on this being a time in his life where Bruce is just starting his vigilante career. So it genuinely adds to the story, as this is a motivating factor that would have been at the forefront of his mind at this point in his life. Okay, finally we get to the meat of the issue, which is also going to function as my conclusion here. If you look at this adaptation as a whole, Part 1 didn't really cut much from the issues it was adapting, whereas Part 2 cuts a lot, as it was covering 9 months, whereas Part 1 was only covering 4. This, I think, was undoubtedly done to streamline the story and make a cleaner, more coherent mystery. The comic was episodic in nature and focused on a variety of things in addition to the mystery. The majority of those things are either toned down or cut out completely so the main plot can take centre stage. And even though the Long Halloween comic is a mystery, Jeff Loeb seems much more interested in what's happening in and around Gotham than the Holiday Killer themselves. So as a result, the mystery is more of a backdrop, whereas the mob politics, themes of insanity, changing times in Gotham, and the characterization of Gotham itself takes centre stage. Whereas the movie is very much the inverse of that. The mystery is at the forefront, with the other themes colouring the story and making it more interesting. So ultimately, which version you think is superior is really going to boil down to what you personally are more interested in seeing from Gotham. If you are really attached to Batman as the world's greatest detective, I think a lot of people out there are going to be very, very happy with a decent Batman mystery, because those are depressingly quite rare. Whereas if you're more interested in the world of Batman and the people within Gotham and Gotham itself and the whole psychological aspect to this very unique corner of the DC world, then I think you're going to be far more drawn to the comic. So thanks again everyone for tuning in. I am again sorry this one was delayed, but I am really happy to have gotten through this because this is an adaptation that really deserved to be looked at in detail. I love The Long Halloween. I think it's a great comic, not a great mystery, but a really definitive, amazing work of art. But I really did enjoy the movie. I think they took the key aspects from the comic, took out the parts that didn't work, and just constructed a better detective story all in. So if you liked Long Halloween as much as I did and liked my take on it, please like and subscribe. Like I said, I'm trying to make a push to get to my 1,000 subscribers. Trying to open that community tab. They really just don't let you open it unless you have 1,000 subscribers. And thank you once again to my patrons. There's my new patron. Welcome to you. Thank you very much. And I will see you in the next video. And guys, genuinely let me know what you'd like to see for the next video. With all the Disney Plus shows out of the way, with Titans out of the way, with this out of the way, it's kind of open season for my videos at the moment.